Chapter 101 Turf War. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Castor had been lucky enough to enter the dream realm near the city and arrive at the castle much earlier than the three of them. By the time Sunny, Nephice and Cassie had found their way to the human settlement, he was already in good standing there. Despite the fact that there were a lot of opportunities for a talented legacy to rise through the ranks of Gunlog's army, he had nevertheless decided to remain independent and eventually joined the Changing Stars cohort, drastically raising their combat strength and reputation. Looking back, that was when all of Sunny's problems had really started. That's right, it was all his fault, not mine. Yeah, definitely. Grinding his teeth, Sunny kicked the heavy chest and cursed under his breath. Then, acting as if nothing had happened, he smiled brightly and left the hidden chamber once again. Down below, things were getting interesting. Attracted by the smell of blood, several monsters tried to enter the ruined cathedral to feast on the fresh corpses. However, the Black Knight was as full of wrath as ever. Just as Sunny climbed onto the support beams, he was finishing off a large creature that looked like a praying mantis made of human skin. Initially, Sunny planned to take a look at the material possessions left behind by the 5 unfortunate thugs, but the sight of the ferocious battle made him change his mind. He would have to do it later. Besides, his shadow had already looked through the bloody remains and came to the conclusion that there was nothing really valuable among the dismembered corpses. Not wasting any more time, Sunny escaped through the roof of the cathedral and retraced his steps to the place where he had fought the Blood Fiend. The body of the hunting party's leader was still there. Of course, his memories had long disappeared, leaving the bearded man dressed only in rags. The heavy battle axe was gone, too. Sunny sighed. That's why killing people is not worth it. His shadow covered its face with a hand and shook its head dejectedly, trying to express that his wording was nothing short of unfortunate. Sunny frowned. What? It's not. And for him, it was doubly so. When one awakened killed another, they received a considerable portion of the enemy's soul essence without having to shatter their soul shard. Sunny, however, was not an ordinary awakened. His aspect was based on consuming shadow fragments instead. That meant that even if his enemy had absorbed hundreds of soul shards in the past, Sunny would only receive the number of shadow fragments matching their rank and class, just like he would after slaying a nightmare creature. Since all sleepers were mere dormant beasts, in this case, the number was 1. Just one fragment away from 400, Sunny said, a bit disheartened. All that work for nothing. Some small, rational piece of his mind was actually relieved that killing humans was not very lucrative. Otherwise, in his state, no, he wouldn't. Surely. Ah. Wouldn't what? Sunny blinked a couple of times, waiting for his inner voice to answer. However, it was strangely silent. Shrugging, he bent down and searched the dead man's body, hoping to find something of value. However, he was left disappointed. There was no pouch full of soul shards as he had imagined. All Sunny found was a strange piece of fabric that had been secretively tucked away into the tall thug's shirt. Looking at the fabric, he noticed crude shapes drawn on it with ink. Some shapes looked strangely familiar. Is that a map? Indeed, it was a primitive map. The shapes he recognized were the various landmarks located in the neighboring parts of the cursed city. Sunny knew many of them by heart, and had even explored a few in the past. A treasure map. Suddenly, the strange timing of the hunting party's arrival and their lack of experience made perfect sense. They weren't actually hunters. Instead, they were a bunch of fools who had been swindled by some smart person back at the castle into buying a fake treasure map. At least that was the most likely possibility. However. But what if it's real? Sunny blinked, looking at the map with a mix of distaste and avarice. He couldn't decide whether he should try and follow it or throw it away. Luckily, his thought process was interrupted by a thunderous crash. One of the buildings not far from where he was standing suddenly collapsed, filling the street with a cloud of dust and flying debris. A massive shape flew through the air and heavily crashed against another wall, causing an avalanche of stones to fall down. The creature tried to stand up, but then twitched and grew still, spilling rivers of fetid blood all over the pavement. It was unmistakably dead. Sonny quickly hid the map in his armor and dove into the shadows, trying to understand what was happening. Somewhere near, furious roars and the sound of steel clashing against steel could be heard, growing closer with each second. Strangely, there were no human voices. A battle between nightmare creatures. Such things were not rare in the cursed city, but to Sonny's knowledge, there were very few things capable of challenging the current masters of this street and the adjacent square. These creatures were not the most powerful among the inhabitants of the city, but due to their unique characteristics, Sonny tried to avoid them like the plague. He saw several monsters much more powerful than anything he would be willing to take on, ending up sliced and diced into tiny pieces on that square. However, none of them was able to give the protectors of the square as much trouble as they were having right now, at least judging by the desperate sounds of the battle. Intrigued, Sonny decided to take a look. Hidden in the shadows, he climbed up the tall wall of an ancient building and soon arrived on its roof. Watching his footing, Sonny walked forward until he reached the opposite edge of the building. From there, he could see the wide square in all its dark glory. In the middle of the square, a moving statue was fighting against several hulking monsters. Chapter 102 Stone Saint. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. On a dark square surrounded by ruins of once magnificent buildings, a vicious battle was coming to an end. The remains of its solemn protectors were lying on the cold cobblestones, ruthlessly shattered into pieces. Sonny blinked in shock. They actually lost. He was really astonished. The living statues that used to guard the square were a very tough bunch. As far as nightmare creatures of the cursed city went, they weren't the most formidable in terms of size and physical might. However, their strange bodies were extremely durable and capable of withstanding truly devastating amounts of damage. Aside from that, the stalwart stone warriors were also disciplined, proficient in the use of weapons and utterly deadly. They were able to perfectly coordinate their movements, using strategy and tactics to silently overwhelm opponents whose power far surpassed their own. Countless monsters fell to their blades. That's why Sonny had always avoided getting into a confrontation with these weird creatures. Even though they weren't fallen by rank, the stone revenants represented a threat that was enough to make him wary. However, now the ownership of the square was about to change hands. The bodies of the previous masters lay shattered to pieces. In death, they looked just like broken statues. Even their metal armor and weapons had turned to stone after the wielders were destroyed. There were 5 or 6 of these stone piles scattered around the square, while the attackers seemed to have lost only 3 of their numbers, including the massive monster that had been sent crashing through a building earlier. Each body towered above the dark cobblestones like a small hill. The invaders were of a type of the nightmare creature that Sonny had never seen before. These new menacing monsters looked like giant spiders with bodies covered in thick plates of wrought iron. They moved with terrifying speed and force, sending cracks running through the cobblestones with each step. There were currently 2 of them left on the square, circling around the lone surviving stone warrior. The last of the living statues seemed to be a female. Compared to the spiders, she was almost comically small in stature, standing no taller than Sonny himself. The graceful stone creature was armed with a sword and a round shield, wearing a plate armor that covered most of her body, leaving only the eyes exposed. Or, rather, 2 rubies burning with crimson flames that these creatures had instead of eyes. Her armor and weapons were black in color, forged from some unknown and incredibly heavy stone-like alloy. Of course, in reality, they were made out of the same stone as their wielder. However, the dark force that had turned the granite body of this nightmare creature into the strange approximation of flesh had also turned the stone armor into metal. Currently, the last of the living statues was standing with her shield raised, the blade of the sword resting on its rim. Her head was lowered, ruby eyes silently following the movements of the 2 spider monsters. Sonny didn't know for sure, but he suspected that these spiders were both fallen beasts. In any case, the stone woman was doomed. Her enemies were just toying with her, savoring the helplessness of their victim before finishing the job. He didn't really care. In fact, he was waiting for the show. Watching nightmare creatures slaughter each other was one of his favorite pastimes, and the best thing about it was that it didn't matter who won. Come on, get her. However, in the next moment, he was surprised. In a strange turn of events, the stone monster lunged at the spiders first. Calmly striking her sword against the rim of the shield twice, she dashed forward with grim determination. The spider she was aiming at was a second too late to react. However, due to its superior physical form, it was still able to meet the sudden onslaught with a vicious strike of its own. One of its legs shot forward, threatening to shatter the stone body of the attacking living statue into tiny pieces. The smaller creature deflected the blow with her sword and bashed the spider with the round shield, putting all of her weight and inhuman strength into the strike. Sunny blinked as the massive body of the fallen beast was thrown back and toppled over. The black sword immediately lashed out, sending a shockwave through the spider's guts. A rain of strikes fell on the iron surface of the monster's abdomen, filling the square with the clangor of metal. The stone warrior attacked with savage ferocity, using both the sword and the shield to inflict as much damage as possible in a short amount of time. Just as the iron plate protecting the soft innards of the monster cracked, the second beast joined the fray. The following bloodbath was nothing short of horrifying. Despite the fact that the spiders were much faster and stronger, the steadfast stone wraith kept up with them for a while. Her indomitable will and ruthless resolve were enough to give the fearsome creatures pause. Moving with the deadly precision of a bloodthirsty killing machine, the living statue completely disregarded self-preservation in favor of making her enemies suffer. It seemed as though she was determined to take them to the grave with her. Noel.end soon, the terrible wounds on her body accumulated, making the stone creature look like a vandalized piece of macabre art. However, the spiders were no better. Their fetid blood was spilling everywhere, painting the whole square red. Severed limbs and shards of cracked iron littered the ground, mixing with the shattered remains of the fallen stone warriors. Finally, one of the spiders fell heavily to the ground and twitched, drawing its last breath. The remaining beast lunged at the staggered stone monster, its countless eyes burning with fury. The round black shield rose one last time and then flew aside, torn away along with the right arm of the stalwart living statue. However, almost at the same time, the blade of her sword pierced through the massive beast's skull, ending its life just a moment before breaking apart and turning to stone. Sunny shook his head. What an impressive sight. A lowly awakened creature slaying two fallen beasts. Midnight Shard would have liked that fierce last stand a lot. Come to think of it, this was nothing short of inconceivable. However, the graceful stone warrior paid dearly for performing the bloody miracle. Staggering once again, she fell heavily to the ground, clearly done for. The battle for the ownership of the Dark Square was over. Nobody won. Chapter 103 Coup de Grace. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As the dust settled, Sunny abandoned his hiding spot on the roof of one of the buildings surrounding the square and jumped down. Avoiding the puddles of fetid blood, he walked among the corpses littering the ground and approached the dying stone monster. The nightmare creature was lying on her back, her body battered and broken. From up close, Sunny was able to see it better. The black armor of the strange monster was slowly turning to stone. In its gaps, he could see her slightly lighter skin. It was smooth like polished granite and dark gray in color. Streams of ruby dust was flowing from the terrible wounds, looking almost like blood. Two crimson gems that served her as eyes slowly moved, focusing on Sunny. There was no particular expression in them, just tired stillness. The flames that used to burn inside were slowly dimming. The statuesque creature stared at him without making a sound. In fact, Sunny wasn't sure that these monsters were even capable of producing sounds. Throughout the whole fight, she had remained eerily silent. He sighed. Life is not fair, huh? With these words, he summoned the midnight shard and thrust it through the visor of the dying creature's helm. Even at the death's door, the stone-like flesh of the living statue proved to be extremely tough. However, he put enough strength into his strike, not wishing to make the poor thing suffer more than necessary. He was always glad to kill a nightmare creature, but this one deserved a quick death. To be honest, he was very impressed by the small stone warrior's desperate last stand. They didn't know who they were messing with. But you showed them. At that moment, the familiar voice of the spell resounded in the darkness. You have slain an awakened monster, Stone Saint. Your shadow grows stronger. Sunny smiled. That's 4 shadow fragments. Finally. 403. However, in the next second, he forgot what he was thinking about. Because the spell wasn't done talking. Whispering into his ear, it slowly said. You have received an echo. Stone Saint. Sunny's eyes opened wide. Did he hear it right? An echo. He had finally received another echo. Cautiously looking around, Sunny lowered his voice and said to the shadow. You heard it too, right? The shadow stared at Sunny in exasperation, then gestured at its mouth, lowered its hands and didn't say anything. He smiled. Exactly. That's what the spell said. Humming a song, he paced back and forth for some time, then suddenly flinched. Oh, right. I should get out of here. Now that the stone people are gone, who knows what kind of horrors will try to make this square their nest. He made a move to leave, but then stopped and looked at the scene of slaughter with avarice. However, I really should get some mementos first. It's not every day that you stumble upon that many dead nightmare creatures before the carrion eaters arrive to feast on the corpses. This was a chance he won't get any time soon. Sunny hesitated for a few seconds, trying to decide which monsters to approach first. The spiders were obviously much stronger. If they were really of the fallen rank, their soul shards would be incredibly valuable. However, buying anything with a bunch of ascended soul shards would be very suspicious. Plus, it would take a while to find the crystals inside the massive bodies of the giant beasts. The living statues were of the lower rank, but their shattered remains were easy to search. The other inhabitants of the cursed city could arrive at any minute. So, with a deep sigh, Sunny ran to the nearest pile of shattered stones and kneeled beside it, hoping to notice the gleam of the soul shards as soon as possible. He was barely done with the second dead statue when a sudden noise made him stop. Knowing that greed had doomed a lot of people to their deaths, Sunny suppressed the desire to linger here to the last possible moment and quickly dashed away, putting the last crystal he had managed to find inside his armor on the run. Summoning the kunai, he threw it into the air and then pulled on the invisible string, making the dagger spin around a stone column. As soon as the string coiled itself around the column, he jumped and made the string contract, sending him flying up. Just like the golden rope, the invisible string that connected the kunai to his wrist was incredibly sturdy and capable of changing its length at will, which allowed Sunny to use the throwing dagger as an improvised grappling hook from time to time. Using the top of the stone column to jump even higher, he grabbed onto the cracks in the wall of one of the ruined buildings and quickly climbed up. By the time he reached the roof, the noises produced by the approaching creature were already loud enough to make him shiver. Whatever that thing was, Sunny didn't want to find out. The sound it produced while moving made him think of a giant snake, one with countless mouths, each hissing the notes of a strange, maddening tune. Luckily, he left the wide square just in time to never meet that abomination. By the time Sunny had returned to the ruined cathedral, the night was already coming to the end. The eastern horizon was growing lighter, and the sound of the black waves crushing against the city wall was growing restless. Walking across the support beams stretching above the grand hall, he caught the glimpse of the marching Black Knight and sighed. One day, he was going to kill the bastard on some glorious day. But not this day. Today, he had other things to do. Reaching the safety of his hidden lair, Sunny put the soul shards into his treasure chest and then sat down on a magnificent wooden chair. There was an excited smile on his face. It was finally time to find out what was the difference between a normal echo and one transformed into a shadow. Chapter 104 Soul Arsenal. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Not wasting any more time, Sunny dove into his soul sea. Despite his changed mental state, it was as calm as always. The silent expanse of still water stretched into the empty distance, with the shadow core hovering above like a dark star. Tiny spheres of light floated in the air around it, reflecting on the surface of the tranquil sea. The silent shadows were still there, standing motionless at the edge of darkness. Compared to before, their ranks had swelled. Monsters of all shapes and sizes were among them now, making Sunny's collection of slain enemies look increasingly impressive. Walking past them, he glanced at one or another from time to time, recalling the thrilling battles with a mix of dread and pride. This was his personal museum, a dark monument to all his sins. Wait, sins? Why sins? Just at that moment, Sunny stumbled and stopped. Not too far away from him, a gaunt shadow stood among the menagerie of terrifying creatures, silently staring at him with empty eyes. That shadow once belonged to a young man, not much older than Sunny himself. He had lived in the ramshackle settlement beyond the castle's gates, struggling to survive like everybody else. Before. Sunny looked away. Don't you look at me like that. It was your own fault, fool. You shouldn't have asked me all those questions. Out of the 3 people he had murdered with his own hands, this kill was the only one that made Sunny feel something. Because it wasn't done in the heat of the battle or to settle a personal score. This one was done in cold blood. It was why he had to leave the castle, among other things. Sunny grimaced. I said stop looking at me. Just stay dead and don't bother me with your nonsense. Huffing angrily, he turned away. Soon, he walked past the shadows of the Blood Fiend, the hunting party's leader, and the deadly Stone Saint. Glancing at the statuesque figure of the stone monster, Sunny forgot all about the gaunt shadow and smiled. He was here to take a look at her echo, after all. The prospect of having another echo under his command was already very exciting. The loyal and strangely personable scavenger had been of great help to Sunny in the past, tremendously increasing his combat performance. After all, despite having a divine aspect and a uniquely powerful ability, Sunny was still just a dreamer, one whole rank below the echo. The scavenger, however, was merely a beast, while the Stone Saint was a monster. Her power was comparable to that of the ferocious Carapace Centurions, far surpassing anything that Sunny could ever hope to achieve in this cursed place. The strange nature of the steadfast living statue made her even more formidable. Having a servant like that would make many impossible things possible. However, Sunny wanted even more. He was waiting to see what miracle his aspect was going to perform, hoping that the results would surpass his wildest expectations. Soon, he was standing under the black sun of his shadow core, observing the spheres of light that represented his memories. There were 9 of them now. The ones that he actually used were the Puppeteer's Shroud, the Midnight Shard, the Prowling Thorn, the Ordinary Rock, and the Endless Spring. Savoring the anticipation, Sunny summoned each of them one by one and read the glowing runes surrounding the memories. He had gotten a heavy kunai after defeating a peculiar creature that resembled a monstrous armored porcupine. The rain of jagged bone quills had left several holes in Sunny's body, but the reward was well worth it. Memory. Prowling Thorn. Memory rank. Awakened. Memory tier. 2. Memory type. Weapon. Memory description. This flying dagger is as unpredictable and fickle as the affection of a young beauty, but, perhaps, not as deadly. Memory enchantments. Rose of Betrayal. Enchantment description. The Prowling Thorn is connected to its wielder by an invisible string. This string is strong but mercurial, just like the treacherous bond of sentimental attachment. After reading this description for the first time, Sunny couldn't help but wonder if the spell had been scorned by a lover once. The runes practically exuded bitterness. Next on the list was his most dangerous memory, the talking rock. Memory. Ordinary rock. Memory rank. Awakened. Memory tier. Memory type. Tool. Memory description. Just an ordinary rock. Memory enchantments. Not really. Enchantment description. The word is mightier than the sword. The rock is mightier than the word. The funny thing was that the ordinary rock, which was capable of repeating various sounds, had fallen into the hands of a person who was unable to tell lies. It was now the most honest memory in two whole worlds. It had also made Sunny think twice before opening his mouth. Sometimes. The last memory he decided to take a look at was, perhaps, the most precious to him. It was the beautiful glass bottle that Cassie had given Sunny as a farewell gift. Memory. Endless spring. Memory rank. Dormant. Memory tier. 4. Memory type. Tool. Memory description. A lovesick devil had once imprisoned a mighty river in this fragile glass bottle. It was his gifted to a beautiful desert spirit. Memory enchantments. Gift of water. Enchantment description. This bottle contains enough water to make flowers bloom in the desolate heart of the most lifeless of deserts. This one was sort of romantic. It seemed as though the spell was all over the place when coming up with these descriptions, to the point where Sunny couldn't even tell if it was being serious. With a sigh, he dismissed the sphere of light containing the endless spring and glanced up. The other 4 of his memories were not very useful. They were an incredibly heavy tower shield, a suit of armor that was worse than the puppeteer's shroud in every regard, a glass eye capable of producing bright beams of harmless red light, and the obnoxiously loud silver bell, the first memory he had ever gotten. The remaining 3 had been awarded to him for killing comparatively weak monsters on the streets of the cursed city. He was hoping to trade them for something more suitable during his next visit to the castle, whenever that might be. Forgetting about the memories, Sunny finally focused his attention on the brightest sphere of light that was floating in the dark emptiness above his head, the one containing his new echo. He willed it to descent and watched as the sphere glided down, softly touching the surface of dark water a few moments later. It slowly dimmed, revealing the stone figure hidden within. Here in the dark silence of the Soul Sea, the stone saint looked just like a statue. She was approximately as tall as Sunny, looking miniature in comparison to the rest of the nightmare creatures he had to face on the Forgotten Shore. She was also uniquely human-like in appearance. If not for the dark gray hue and the stone-like nature of her granite skin, Sunny might have even mistaken the strange monster for a sleeper. Provided, he couldn't see much of her body behind the graceful dark armor. The nature of these strange creatures remained a mystery. Chapter 105 Living Stone. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Previously, Sunny had considered the living statues to be just that, monuments brought to life by evil spirits. There were a lot of revenants like that walking the streets of the cursed city. Take the Black Knight, for example. Sunny was almost sure that the bastard was actually just a suit of armor with a vengeful wraith imprisoned within it. He had no proof that there was an actual body in that moving steel fortress, at least. However, after watching the stone saint die right before his eyes, he wasn't so sure that she and the Black Knight were the same anymore. There certainly were similarities, even the design of their armors was somewhat similar, as though one had originated from the other. But the stone warrior's armor seemed much more ancient. And then there was the ruby dust that flowed from the stone creature's wounds instead of blood. Since when did statues have blood? It was almost like these strange creatures were designed to possess their own weird form of life. Come think about it, the stone warriors resembled artificial beings brought to life by some dark magic much more than they resembled undead creatures. Mysteries, mysteries, mysteries all around. Perhaps the runes describing the stone saint would provide him with some answers. The echo, meanwhile, was coming to life. Two magenta flames ignited in her gemstone eyes. The stone of her armor suddenly gleamed with subtle metal shine, the smooth surface of her granite skin turned slightly less rigid. Silently turning her head, the saint gazed at Sunny through the narrow split of her helmet's visor. Let's see. He concentrated on the runes. Echo. Stone Saint. Echo rank. Awakened. Echo class. Monster. Echo attributes. Battle Master, Stalwart, Mark of Divinity. Sunny blinked. Mark of Divinity. That was the same as his original attribute. What business did a nightmare creature have walking around with the traces of divinity left in its evil, corrupted soul? And what with these other attributes? Battle Master attribute description. Born on the battlefield, the Stone Saint is proficient in all forms of combat. Stalwart attribute description. The Stone Saint is highly resistant to all forms of damage, as well as being fully immune to mind and soul attacks. Bewildered, Sunny shook his head. No wonder these silent stone warriors were so deadly. They were literally a bunch of killing machines created to last as long and deal as much damage as possible on the battlefield. But who had created them? Leaving the attributes alone, he lowered his gaze and read the next line of runes. Echo description. Deep in the cavernous halls of his dark domain, the last child of the Unknown had created them from stone to quell the fire burning in his resentful heart. However, that fire only grew hotter. Designed to bring peace, they were instead born into an endless war. The Unknown again. Or rather, their children. It seemed like his theory was correct. The Stone Saint was either an artificial being or a descendant of one. In any case, that was before she was corrupted by, well, whatever it was that had corrupted all the nightmare creatures, and especially those in the cursed city. Now even gods wouldn't be able to describe what exactly she was. Not that it mattered. A monster was a monster. Sunny was more interested in the fact that the traces of divinity that the stone warrior bore had to have come from their original creator, who was at least partially one of the Unknown. Which meant that the Unknown, indeed, were closely related to the gods and to divinity itself. Just like Mysterious Weaver. Looking away from the runes, Sunny studied the motionless echo with his altered eyes. What he saw made him smile darkly. Just like the memories, the true essence of the echo was weaved from the countless diamond strings that formed an infinitely complex pattern. Only in its case, the pattern was even more elaborate, dwarfing anything that Sunny had previously seen. 2 embers were burning inside the Stone Saint's body, serving as anchors for the endless strings. One of them was situated in the place where her heart should have been, the other in the lower part of her abdomen. Sunny closed one eye and looked more closely. And there, behind the shining pattern of the diamond strings, he noticed another, much more primitive and crude system of adamantine threads. They pierced the stone flesh of the echo, resembling a human nervous system. These strings were also seemingly made from diamond, but they were much less ethereal. In fact, they were entirely corporeal. Sunny frowned. Makes sense, that makes sense. Wait, how does it make sense? The memories and the echoes were created by the spell. They were artificial. The Stone Saint, too, was artificial, but in a much more mundane sense. She was made by a child of the Unknown, just like her echo was made by the spell. Which meant what? That the technique that had been used to create the Stone Saint was eerily similar to the technique that the spell used, although it did look extremely primitive in comparison. Could that mean that the spell itself had come from the Unknown? Sunny grimaced and shook his head. No. Although it was a sound theory, there was too little information to actually consider it substantiated or even remotely believable. He needed to find out more, learn more, uncover more before even beginning to understand the true story that connected the spell, the gods, the Unknown, and his own life into one nightmarish tapestry. But there would be time for it later. Right now, he had something equally as interesting right within his grasp. Glancing one last time at the graceful stone monster, Sunny gulped and licked his lips. Then, he said timidly. Let's do this. Taking a step forward, he hesitated and then carefully put his hand on the breastplate of the stone saint's armor, right across from the place where the main nexus of her spell weave was situated. To his surprise, the breastplate felt like stone and was warm to the touch. It was as though a furious crimson flame was burning inside the nightmare creature's chest. Ha! As soon as Sunny touched the echo, a new string of runes appeared in the air in front of him. Transform echo into a shadow. He hesitated, once again afraid to make the choice. What was he going to do if the process made the stone saint weaker, or even useless? Trying not to think of this possibility, Sunny sighed and forced himself to say, yes. An imperceptible change happened to the soul sea, as though a gust of wind suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The tranquil dark water seemed to simultaneously stay still and move restlessly. Then, a sudden pressure came from somewhere above. Raising his head, Sunny saw two dark beams descending from the depths of the shadow core. One of them fell on the echo, while the other landed on one of the silent shadows that stood motionlessly behind his back, as though connecting them together. Bathed in the dark light, the shadow of the dead stone saint slowly dissolved into it. And then the echo began to change. Chapter 106 Creating a Monster. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Under Sunny's watchful eyes, the echo began to change. The light falling from the shadow core seemed to seep into the flesh of the stone creature, making it shine with dark radiance. Wisps of shadowy fog emanated from beneath her impervious plate armor, slowly merging with it. It looked as though the stone saint was engulfed in ghostly black flame, being remade by it. What little color there was on her body was washed away and replaced with nothing but darkness. Only two crimson fires burning in her ruby eyes remained, slightly changing their hue and becoming more menacing. Of course, all these changes were happening on the surface. If not for the traumatic transformation that Sunny had gone through to inherit a part of Weaver's forbidden lineage, this would have been all he saw. However, with his eyes altered by the agony of consuming the drop of divine blood, he was able to see much more. Beneath the surface, the essence of the echo was being changed as well, in a way much more fundamental than its outer appearance. The shining embers that served as anchors for the weave of diamond strings had lost their radiance, becoming as transparent and empty as the shadow core itself. The diamond strings were gone, replaced by a sea of darkness. That darkness had a form, a shape that perfectly followed the lines of the stone saint's body. It was as though a living shadow was now inhabiting it, usurping the role that had been played by the pattern of the sorceress strings once. Although similar in appearance to the original echo, this new creature was a completely different type of existence. Sunny had never seen anything like it before. It was created by his aspect, after all. The process of transformation, meanwhile, was coming to the end. The ray of dark light cast by the shadow core was disappearing, its reflection drowning in the calm water of the silent sea. The black flames were already fully absorbed by the stone-like armor of the saint, gone with the dark radiance of her smooth granite skin. Sunny observed the stone saint. Clad in the lusterless black armor, with two ruby flames burning in the deep shadows of the visor, she looked like an incarnation of pure darkness, a noble demon sent to wage war against heaven from the depths of hell. What changed the most, however, was her presence. Before, the echo felt like an empty shell, a magical tool rather than an actual being. Now, however, there were hints of mysterious will in her crimson eyes, a subtle sense there was a nascent spark of sentience burning somewhere deep within her lightless soul. Or whatever it was that the menacing monster had instead of a soul. This was a shadow. Just as this thought appeared in Sunny's mind, the faintly familiar voice of the spell resounded above the dark waters of the soul sea. You have created a shadow monster. Stone Saint. Hearing these words, Sunny smiled. However, a second later, the smile disappeared from his lips, replaced by a pained expression. Only now, after the process was complete, he felt a subtle emptiness permeating his whole body. He felt weakened. The loss of 100 shadow fragments was finally making its effect known. He had suspected that spending them in this way would reverse the process of power accumulation that had consumed him for these last few months, but it was still an unpleasant feeling. He was much stronger than he had been during the journey through the labyrinth, however, some of his physical might was unmistakably gone, leaving him with a bitter feeling of regret. No, he had known that this would happen, and decided to proceed with the experiment anyway. It was well worth it. Forgetting about the change in his physical state, Sunny walked around his shadow and observed her from different sides. The stone saint's eyes silently followed his movements, sending glints of crimson light reflecting from the black surface of the tranquil sea. This is amazing. I wonder what she is capable of. Summoning the runes, Sunny immediately noticed that there was a new cluster shining right beneath the one describing his echoes. Shadows. Stone Saint. Excited to learn more about his new pet monster, Sunny was about to concentrate his attention on the runes, but then stopped and glanced down at his own shadow, a little embarrassed. Sorry. How are you feeling, buddy? You aren't, jealous or anything. The shadow looked away and pretended that it didn't know him. It was seemingly indifferent to the appearance of a new shadow creature in his service, even though this new shadow had a capital letter to its name. Well, I just wanted to say that you shouldn't be. I still value you very much. Even though the Stone Saint is probably capable of slicing powerful monsters into tiny pieces with her sword, while you're still just a useless piece of, an incredibly capable scout and my most trusted confidant, I still appreciate you. Yeah. He stared at the shadow for a bit and, seeing that it didn't react in any way, turned away. This guy, he'd better step up his game. Ha! Focusing on the runes, Sunny summoned the description of the shadow and read. Shadow. Stone Saint. Shadow rank. Awakened. Shadow class. Monster. Shadow attributes. Battle Master, Stalwart, Spark of Divinity. Sunny blinked. It seemed as though Stone Saint's divine attribute had evolved to match his own. Was it because he was her master? This was a nice surprise. However, he still didn't see how she was different from before. Frowning, he continued to look through the shimmering runes. Shadow description. Shadow Saint was created by the treacherous lost from light in the cursed darkness of the forgotten shore. Again with this whole treachery stuff. Can I get another epithet, huh? But in the next moment, he forgot all about this little frustration. Because the following line of runes showed him something really unexpected. Just beneath the description, a familiar set of runes shined in the air. Shadow fragments. 0/200. Chapter 107 Growing Shadow. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sunny stared at the runes, perplexed. Then, a sudden light of understanding appeared in his eyes. He finally realized what was the principal difference between an echo and a shadow. It was really very simple. The echoes were mere replicas of the creatures that had left them behind. They were molded in their image and never changed, always remaining the same as the originals at the moment of their deaths. Shadows, however, were different. After all, they were mercurial by nature, always changing their forms and shapes depending on the environment. And so, a shadow was capable of change to some extent, too. It was capable of growth. His eyes widened. By slaying nightmare creatures, he was able to absorb their shadow fragments and become stronger. Eventually, his shadow core was bound to evolve, turning from dormant to awakened, and beyond. The jump in power that came with this evolution was nothing short of unmatched. Granted, he wasn't sure about the particular details of this process, not to mention that, as a human, he could only become an awakened after returning from the dream realm into the real world, which was impossible to do in this godforsaken place. He also didn't know what would happen if he actually managed to accumulate the 1,000 shadow fragments that the runes demanded. But no matter what happened, if he were to continue walking forward on the path of the awakened, he would eventually outgrow his memories and echoes, rendering them weak and useless against the enemies of the comparable rank. He would then be forced to discard them and try to find suitable replacements, with no guarantee whatsoever that he would actually succeed. This problem was not as dire when it came to memories, which were comparatively easy to get. The echoes, however, were exceedingly rare. Once an echo grew too weak to accompany its master, replacing it was an extremely tall task. But shadows. Shadows were capable of growing with him, becoming more powerful just as he grew more powerful. As long as Sunny was willing to put in the work, his shadow would never fall behind. The possibilities that this simple quality opened up were truly endless. It was enough to completely change his plans for the future. In the past, Sunny always envisioned himself as the main force on the battlefield, only relying on memories and a stray echo or two to support him. That was because echoes of higher ranks and classes were so unimaginably hard to come by. Although much more rare than memories, there were still many dormant echoes around, and a fair number of awakened ones too. They were mainly shared among masters and saints, who were capable of defeating the nightmare creature of these ranks with comparative ease. But battles against fallen and corrupted monsters, not to mention anything even more dreadful, were never easy. As such, there were not enough trophies brought back after killing creatures of their kind to make the idea of acquiring an echo of a higher rank a realistic possibility. For everyone, except for Sunny. He could slaughter weaker monsters, get lesser echoes, and then cultivate them into unstoppable beasts of slaughter. Not bound by the laws of probability and diminishing chances, he could slowly build an army of powerful shadows to fight his battles for him, and then watch them destroy his enemies from a safe distance while sipping on a cocktail. That's what rich people drank, right? Not to mention that monsters were not bound by the need to pass nightmares to raise their rank, at least not to Sunny's knowledge. To be honest, he had no idea how nightmare creatures evolved their cores. Carapace Demon had seemed to do just fine just by eating the fruits of the soul tree and slowly absorbing large amounts of soul essence. In any case, there was a possibility that he would be able to make the Shadow Saint much more powerful than he himself had the chance to become on the Forgotten Shore. Perhaps even powerful enough to make his life here truly tolerable. Looking at the shadow with excited sparks dancing in his eyes, Sunny grinned from ear to ear. You and I are going to accomplish great things together, buddy. If his own shadow wasn't worried about its place in his heart yet, it would be smart to start worrying about it right about now. The question that was consuming Sunny's thoughts now was this. How, exactly, was he supposed to feed the Shadow Saint with fragments? If he could simply transfer some of his own to her, he would do it without a second thought, even though that would diminish his personal strength even further. However, there seemed to be no way to do so. No amount of looking at the runes, touching the silent stone creature or trying to talk to the spell did the trick. Sunny even asked for advice from his own shadow, but that guy was in no mood to talk. The scornful word traitor was written all over his expressionless dark spot of a face. At least that's what Sunny read from it after being met with the silent treatment. In all the excitement, he failed to remember that the shadow was physically unable to speak. Scratching the back of his head, Sunny paced around the soul sea and tried to come up with a reasonable way to stuff some shadow fragments inside the taciturn stone monster. Well, the most obvious answer is to go and make her kill some nightmare creatures. However, will it work? When my loyal scavenger killed something, it was I who received the fragments, not him. Wait, him. Did Cassie infect me with her childish desire to assign human qualities to everything? It, not him. It was I and not it. Right, that's better. Wait, what was I talking about? Glancing at the outside world, Sunny frowned. It was currently the day there, usually, he would be sound asleep by now. Going out during the day was dangerous. He would have to walk outside the shadows, allowing all kinds of fallen horrors to lay eyes on him. He only survived for so long in this hell by being extremely cautious, cowardly, and only hunting during the night. He paid a harsh price to learn these lessons, almost losing his life in the process. But still, should he risk it? Chapter 108 Test Dummy. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Still undecided, Sunny dismissed the stone saint. He was curious to see if the slumbering shadow would become a sphere of light just like an echo would. However, she did not. As soon as he gave the command, the ornate armor of the stone creature was immediately engulfed in black flame, and with a gust of ghostly wind, she was gone. It seemed as though the shadow was returned into the embrace of the shadow core that had created her, and was now sleeping in its depths, bathed in the invisible waves of nurturing dark flames. Sunny scratched the back of his head. So, the shadows literally dwelled within the deepest part of his soul. He didn't really know how to feel about this, but felt that it was strangely fitting. He was a child of shadows himself, after all. With a thoughtful sigh, Sunny emerged from the soul sea and looked around his secret lair. Outside the ruined cathedral, the sun was shining above the cursed city. But none of its rays could reach this tranquil hidden chamber. Sunny suspected that once, long ago, the secret room served as the private quarters of a venerated young priestess who performed sacred rites in this temple. He had found some of her things in the modest wardrobe that was hidden behind a stone panel, somehow preserved in pristine condition despite the thousands of years that had passed since the city had fallen to the curse of darkness. If not for the lamentable disparity of their genders, he would have had a whole collection of clothes to wear, instead of spending every waking hour dressed in the same good old puppeteer's shroud. There were limits to the amount of abuse that even a 5th-tier armor could withstand. However, in a sense, he was lucky. At least his armor was made out of soft fabric. It would have been much worse if he had to wear a suit of plate armor or a rusty chainmail instead. That priestess, of course, had not used the same extravagant method to enter her private quarters. There actually was a doorway that led outside the room and into a concealed corridor that ended with a narrow stairwell. However, the stairs had long collapsed, leaving only a deep vertical shaft behind. This was Sunny's route of escape in case someone or something would find his lair. Standing up from the magnificent wooden chair, Sunny paced around for a bit and then lighted the fire under a makeshift stove, planning to make himself some late supper. The orange flames illuminated the hidden chamber, sending shadows dancing on its walls. Oh, right. I never got fresh meat. The night was so eventful that he had completely forgotten the initial purpose of his hunt. Throwing the last few strips of meat on the grill, he seasoned them with salt and sighed once again. The desire to simply venture outside and get into a fight with the nearest nightmare creature seemed more attractive with each minute. No. That's how you end up dead. To distract himself from these seductive thoughts, Sunny decided to summon the stone saint into the material world and perform a few experiments in the safety of his secret lair. Standing up, he willed the shadow to appear. The secretive chamber was submerged in deep shadows. His own was hidden in one of them, standing with its arms crossed on the cold stone wall. In Sunny's vision, it appeared as a silhouette made from a deeper shade of black. Usually, an echo would appear in front of the summoner, weaved from the countless sparks of moving light. However, the stone saint entrance was completely different. Instead of materializing out of thin air, she stepped out of his shadow like a sinister dark night. Wreathed in darkness, her elegant figure emanated a sense of danger and foreboding. First, 2 ruby eyes ignited in the depths of the shadow. Then, the darkness came to life and surged forward, taking the form of the deadly stone monster. The sole of her stone-like soleret touched the floor with a loud clang, and a moment later, the shadow saint was standing in the middle of his room, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword. Sunny grimaced, feeling a slight headache. So, the shadow was hiding in a shadow, and then the shadow came out of the shadow to stand with it in the shadows. This is starting to get out of hand. I really need to come up with better terminology. He felt that this was a vital problem, but no suitable words came to his mind. Glancing at the silent duo, Sunny hesitantly asked. Any ideas? Sadly, both his shadow and his shadow were mute and unable to voice their opinions even if they wanted to. Left with no assistance whatsoever, Sunny sighed. Alright, I'll think of something later. For now, let's see what you're capable of. Summoning his shadow, he wrapped himself in its comforting embrace and faced the stone saint, preparing to test her strength. Inhaling deeply, he focused and gave the menacing monster a command. Strike me. Sunny expected that the shadow would hesitate for a moment, maybe even requiring some persuasion to turn on her master. Instead, the stone saint immediately leaned forward and punched him in the chest without a second thought. With his physical prowess enhanced by the shadow, Sunny was sure of his ability to withstand one blow from the awakened monster, at least to a certain degree. However, he was wrong. So wrong. Before he could even react, the armor-clad stone fist crashed into his ribs, making Sunny feel as though he was hit by a train. In the next second, he found himself lying on the floor, surrounded by numerous pieces of broken wood. Oh no. My chair. The magnificent chair was gone, ruthlessly turned into splinters and firewood by the impact with his back. It was completely unsalvageable. Sunny's back wasn't doing much better. Turning onto his stomach with a moan, Sunny spat a bit of blood on the stone floor and weakly raised one hand, giving the shadow saint thumbs up. Ugh, good, well done. 10 out of 10, just like, crap, that really hurts, just like I expected. Casting a furtive glance at the elegant stone knight, he forced a smile out and tried to stand up. I think I need to amend some details of the future experiments. Next, Sunny was planning to enhance the stone saint with the shadow before getting her to strike him again. However, on second thought, there were better ways to measure her power. Chapter 109 Soulmates. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Picking himself up from the floor, Sunny staggered and found his way back to the fire burning under the improvised grill. Glancing at the motionless stone knight, he spat a bit more blood and groaned. As the appetizing aroma of roasting meat filled the air, the blood weave got busy repairing his body. By the time his supper was ready, Sunny was able to breathe without wincing. Putting the meat on his prized possession, the luxurious silver plate, Sunny prepared to eat. On the forgotten shore, simple everyday necessities like plates were rarer than enchanted swords and magical suits of armor. In the whole cursed city, only Gunlog and his 5 lieutenants were able to dine with as much decorum as Sunny. Granted, he had yet to find even a single pair of chopsticks in this whole damn place, let alone something more technologically advanced, like a spoon. Of course, Sunny could try and make one himself, but that wasn't the same thing. The Shadow Saint was silently looking at him with her burning ruby eyes. Feeling uncomfortable under her mysterious gaze, Sunny glanced at his plate, then at the menacing stone creature. You want some? He raised a piece of meat and offered it to the taciturn monster. However, the stone saint showed no reaction at all. Well, suit yourself. Using the prowling thorn as a kitchen utensil, Sunny dug in, devouring the juicy meat like a starving animal. With not a single human soul around, he didn't bother with table manners at all. That's the life. See, his perpetually hungry outskirt self would have been really shocked to see this extravagant feast. That was real meat. He had hunted and prepared it himself, no less. More than that, he got to enjoy a similar type of luxury food almost every day. Of course, that real meat had come from a revolting horror of a monster, but these were just small details. Chewing on the last piece with a sense of deep satisfaction, Sunny thoughtfully looked at the stone saint. It was time to continue. Earlier, he wanted to see if there was a possible synergy between the different powers that his aspect possessed. Namely, if the enhancement provided by shadow control could be applied to shadows. Sunny knew that his shadow was able to enhance his body, his memories, and, with lesser effect, various inanimate objects. However, it was unable to enhance other humans and memories that belonged to them, as well as any living creature except for Sunny himself. He had secretly tested it during his travels with Nephis and Cassie to come up with this conclusion. More importantly, it couldn't affect echoes. But what about shadows? Giving a mental command, Sunny sent his shadow in the direction of the stone saint and held his breath. Flowing like water, the shadow silently grasped the statuesque monster in its dark embrace. Then, it seemed to disappear, as though absorbed by the stone flesh of the tenebrous night. A moment later, Stone Saint's ruby eyes blazed with crimson fire. Her smooth granite skin shined with dark radiance once again, smoky wisps of the ghostly gray fog oozing from beneath her stone-like armor like dancing flames. Suddenly, it felt as though the temperature in the hidden chamber dropped by a couple of degrees. Shadows around the menacing creature seemed to swell, becoming deeper and darker, like a vast mantle sewn from boundless empty blackness. The elegant stone saint had always looked dangerous and deadly, but now, she was downright fearsome. Even without having the shadow saint strike him again, Sunny could tell that the experiment ended in a resounding success. It was apparent that the two types of his shadows were practically created for each other. Her power was increased twofold, at least. A bit peeved, he looked down and sighed. Why does she look so much cooler than I do when using the shadow? Shouldn't it be the other way around? I'm the true divine shadow here, me. Where's my aura of mysterious coolness? Shaking his head, Sunny lamented his lack of good looks and simultaneously congratulated himself on becoming the master of such a stylish monster. Technically, it didn't matter how his shadows looked, just as long as they were powerful. However, he was secretly glad that his first shadow was not only powerful, but also a darkly beautiful sight to behold. Killing monsters was great, but killing monsters while looking good was even better. Wait, if she can use my shadow, what else can she use? Suddenly excited, Sunny finally swallowed the half-forgotten piece of meat and dismissed the stone saint. Then, he shifted his perspective to look at the soul sea and summoned her again, this time inside it. The shadow appeared in the whirlwind of black flames and stood motionlessly upon the still waters of the silent sea. Her mysterious ruby eyes stared at him through the narrow visor of her stone helmet. Not wasting any time, Sunny looked up at the spheres of light circling around the shadow core. What if I can equip her with actual memories? What to choose? She was extremely strong and very proficient with her round shield, so wasn't it logical to assume that a tower shield would suit her even better? Coincidentally, he happened to have one of those. Sunny summoned the memory that he had gotten in one of the fights on the streets of the cursed city. It was a large, square tower shield that was almost as tall as him. The thing was too heavy and unwieldy to actually use in combat, at least not by Sunny. Plus, he wielded a tachi, which could only perform to its full potential while held in both hands. Grabbing the cumbersome shield, Sunny walked over to the shadow saint and handed it to her with a hopeful smile. Here. Take this. Please. The shadow stared at him for a few moments, then lowered her head and glanced at the tower shield. Come on. Come on, take it. His heart skipped a bit when the statuesque creature slowly raised her hands and grasped the memory with her stone gauntlets. Yes, that's right. Now, use it. The stone saint obediently brought the shield to her chest. And then, shattered it. Sunny froze, his mouth hanging open. Your memory has been destroyed. What? The shards of the broken memory turned into a river of tiny sparks of light, just like the echo of the carapace scavenger and the azure blade had done before disappearing forever. My tower shield. Sunny felt a sharp dagger of sorrow stab at his heart. Yes, the shield was of no use to him. But it would sell for so much money in the real world. Why did this evil thing have to break it? Why? Wasn't his beautiful chair enough? He gazed at the tiny sparks, wanting to cry. However, a moment later, his eyes widened. Because the river of sparks did not disappear. Instead, it circled around the stone saint's body and then suddenly flowed through it, separating into two streams. Each stream was then absorbed by one of the dark embers burning in the depths of the living shadow that was hiding inside the monster's body. Sunny blinked. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Chapter 110 Memento. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sunny stared at the Shadow Saint, dumbfounded. The storm of emotions that the destruction of the tower shield had produced was still tugging on his heartstrings, but now, an equally powerful feeling was slowly welling up in his chest. Not knowing how to process all of this, he simply blinked a couple of times and said in a flat tone. "Ha! So, let me get this straight." He gave the shield to his pet monster hoping that she would be able to use it. And she did, sort of. It's just that instead of wielding the memory, she ate it. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, wondering if he had finally lost it. But no, the echo of the spell's voice was still resounding above the dark waters, whispering the same phrase over and over again. Stone Saint has grown stronger. With a heavy sigh, Sunny summoned the runes and found the description of the shadow. Down at the very bottom of it, the runes were slightly changed. Shadow fragments. 2/200. A wild gleam appeared in his eyes. 2 fragments. He had received the memory of the tower shield after slaying a particularly hardy wraith, who, despite its frightening appearance, had turned out to be merely an awakened monster. For killing it, Sunny himself had received 4 shadow fragments. But that was because his own shadow core was dormant, and as such, he always got double the reward in battles against creatures of the higher rank, 2 for each soul core that an awakened creature possessed. The Stone Saint was such a creature herself, so it was logical to assume that she would not receive the same treatment. The tower shield had come from a monster with 2 awakened cores, so she received 2 fragments for consuming its memory. Which meant that, with a fire of excitement burning in his eyes, Sunny hurriedly summoned another memory. A disgusting eye with a menacing vertical pupil appeared from the dissipating brightness of the descending sphere of light. That eye came from a basilisk-like creature that Sunny had killed a few weeks ago. To survive the battle, he had to fight it with his own eyes closed, relying solely on the shadow sense to move through the rubble and dodge the attacks of the deadly beast. In the end, he had beheaded the vile thing with a slash of his swift blade seconds before being ripped apart by its claws. It was a fine test for his nascent combat skill. Sadly, the memory came with none of the powers that the actual beast had possessed. It was only capable of producing a harmless beam of red light, which could only be used for creating mood lighting, at least in the case of Sunny, who could see in the dark. Grabbing the eye, he held it out for the Stone Saint to take. The shadow grasped the disgusting thing, brought it to her chest, and then crushed it in her armored fist. Once again, the memory disintegrated into countless tiny sparks of ethereal light, which were then absorbed by the darkness hiding inside the elegant creature's body. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Sunny grinned, then threw his head back and laughed. So that's how it was, the shadows fed on memories. They consumed them to receive power, just like he killed nightmare creatures to consume the remnants of their shadows. To make sure, he glanced at the runes again and saw exactly what he had expected to see. Shadow fragments. 3/200. Tier. 1 Awakened memory, 1 fragment. Makes sense. Giddy with anticipation, Sunny summoned the next memory. A bulky suit of rusty plate armor appeared from the sphere of light and hovered in the air in front of him. This one he had received after burning the towering nest of monstrous, flesh-devouring termites to the ground. Creating a bonfire in the absolute darkness of the Forgotten Shores night was a dangerous endeavor, but he had hoped to receive hundreds of shadow fragments by eviscerating the whole swarm of these tiny gluttonous creatures. Judging by the amount of bones littering the ground around the nest, they were a real plague. Sadly, the entire colony had turned out to be a single demonic being, landing him only 6 fragments. He even had to retreat without collecting the soul shards from the smoldering remains of the hive, scared away by the approach of several fallen horrors that had been attracted by the bright flames. The memory was of little consolation, since his own puppeteer's shroud was superior to it in all regards. But now, finally, it could be of use. The stone saint devoured the armor just like she had devoured the over two memories. Once again, the spell announced that the shadow monster had grown stronger. The runes changed again. Shadow fragments. 6/200. Every time the numbers changed, Sunny felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His menacing stone knight was becoming more fearsome with each second. He suspected that gambling addicts felt something similar in the throes of a rare winning streak. Caught in the moment, he grasped the next memory, but then stopped and stared at the small silver bell that lay silently in his hand. This one was the first memory he had ever received, barely holding on to life in the bitter cold and terror of the first nightmare. It was the weakest memory he had, but also the most meaningful. Sunny had killed one human to receive it, and had used it to kill another. The silver bell was a reminder. With bleak eyes, he read the runes that shimmered in the lightless emptiness of his soul. A small memento of a long-lost home, which once brought its owner comfort and joy. Suddenly drained of the excitement that had been consuming him just a few moments ago, Sunny sighed heavily and dismissed the memory. There was a dark expression on his face. Glancing at the motionless shadow saint, he turned away. That's enough for today. Ah, what a long day. I think I'll go to sleep now. Leaving the soul sea, he stood silently for a few minutes, then slowly walked to his bed and fell on it. Dismissing the puppeteer's shroud, Sunny wrapped himself in the blanket and closed his eyes. He was so tired.